Hello class, welcome to our video lecture that continues our discussion of acting styles while looking at the role, depression, isolation, and the performances of Bill Murray and Scarlett Johansson work in Lost in Translation. So, let's briefly talk about the sort of history of acting as we know it in movies. Early actors were usually taken from the theater. Where else would you go before movies had begun except to the people who were on stage and as performers? So when you watch early silent films, the reason why they're acting so differently with these big gestures we talked about that stage actors have, that reason is because that was the way they were trained. Slowly, as actors and directors understood how to act to the camera, their performances changed until what we now know as modern screen acting. In addition, changes to technology, especially the camera, helped make it easier to capture the smaller, more intimate gestures we associate with the way actors act to the lens of a camera. One of the people that was sort of the founder of screen acting is an actor named Lillian Gish. Her changes to her body language and what the book called an expressive coherence of her smaller, more subtle acting gestures really helped to set out the blueprint for modern actors today. So here are some examples. On the left is a scene from an early silent film. See the big gestures. On the right is a picture of the actor Lillian Gish, where you can see more subtle and smaller gestures, especially in her face and the way that she is acting. Of course, as the camera lens improved, so too did sound change the game. Sound created the need for the modern screenplay to have actors use dialogue along with their expressions to perform their characters. Many actors could not make the transition to sound for a variety of reasons. A unique sounding voice, an ability to memorize scripts, and a whole range of things. Like the increase in technologies of the camera, sound allowed for more and more subtle performances. Think of being able to express things now as a whisper or the heavy breathing of a performance, as well as just loud reading the lips dialogue. So, broadly speaking, when we talk about acting choices for the film Lost in Translation, we can think of putting them into two groups. One, naturalistic acting when actors recreate recognizable or plausible human behavior for the camera, and non-naturalistic acting, when actors perform in an excessive, exaggerated, or even sometimes what we would call overacted style for the camera. Overacting is often called chewing the scenery to represent a character really going over the top in their performance. Now, neither naturalistic acting nor non-naturalistic acting are bad. It just depends on the type of movie you're watching. Naturalistic acting, the actors not only look like characters should in their costume, makeup, and hairstyle, but also think, speak, and move the way people would off-screen. Naturalistic acting is meant to represent the real psychological impact of people's actions and words. Even though it's a performance, naturalistic performers should feel like that person could possibly exist outside the film world. They seem, for lack of a better word, like a normal person. This style and approach to acting came to prominence with the Stanislavski Method of acting. So here are just a few examples that we could define as naturalistic performances in movies. The movie Moonlight, the movie Kramer versus Kramer, and the movie Manchester by the Sea all have people trying to perform like real people would. Now, in comparison, non-naturalistic performances may employ strange or outlandish costumes, makeups, or hairstyles. The actors might aim for effects beyond the normal range of humor experience, and they are often intended to distance or estrange audiences from the characters. What we mean by that is non-naturalistic acting wants you to realize that you are watching a movie, that you are watching a character that could not exist in the quote-unquote real world. That distancing or estranging effect can often be why we see so many non-naturalistic performances in the superhero, horror, science fiction, fantasy, and animated genre of movies. So an actor who has presented us with quite a range of non-naturalistic acting performances is Johnny Depp. And we can see from his portrayal of the Mad Hatter, to his portrayal of Willy Wonka, to his portrayal of Edward Scissorhands, all of these characters exist in a world where we could not really take them as real. But that is the point. They're supposed to be weird. They are supposed to be non-natural. So let's move to Lost in Translation. So the question I want you to think about, and one that you will write your third critical review on, is the question, does Sofia Coppola's film use a naturalistic style of acting? Did the performances of Bill Murray, who plays Bob Harris, and Scarlett Johansson, who plays Charlotte, display the emotional states of their characters in a real and natural way, or an unnatural way? And then finally, I want you to think about how the setting of Tokyo for Bob and Charlotte creates an inward view for their characters. What we mean by this is that even though they're in this amazing place of Tokyo with this new culture, for much of the film, it's forcing them to look inward and examine their own lives as opposed to exploring the culture of Japan and Tokyo and learning about it through that method. So let's start with Bob Harris. In the book by Barsom, he provides this quote from Robert Allen, and I think this helps us really understand Bill Murray's performance and what his character is going through at the beginning of the film. Robert Allen states, "The star is powerless yet powerful, different from ordinary people, yet at one time was just like us. Stars make huge salaries, yet the work for which they are handsomely paid does not appear to be work on the screen. The star's private life has little, if anything, to do with his or her job of acting in movies. Yet a large portion of a star's image is constructed on the basis of private matters: romance, marriage, tastes in fashion, and home life." We really see this dichotomy of Bill Murray as Bob Harris as this powerful, famous movie star, yet a powerless individual who seems profoundly unhappy. We see that his job, acting in the Suntory Times commercial, is at odds with his private matters. His wife redecorating their home, asking him for suggestions on construction, and getting a sense that he might be unhappy with the way his life is going. So one of the ways we can see this distinction is the way that Bob is framed against mirrors in the first half of the movie. He's framed there a lot. By placing Bob in front of this mirror, the window acts like a frame that traps Bob. He is looking out at Tokyo for much of the beginning of the film, but he cannot engage with the city, although he does so later on in the movie. Windows are often visual metaphors for the act of self-reflection, because when a person looks through a window in a movie, we are often given a shot of them being able to see out into the real world, but also seeing their own reflection, forcing them to look within. This focuses an inward turn in the character. For Bob, it's time for him to reflect on his life and career. As you watch the first half of the film, or rewatch the first half of the film, ask yourself how Murray's performances in front of these windows helps show the mental state of the character. The metaphor of mirrors reaches its turning point during the pool scene. Water is a reflective surface, much like a window. Water, it is in this reflective surface that Bob finally goes fully under and kind of is starting to get more in touch with his feelings of isolation, depression, and the state of his life at the time. Then, as we will talk about soon in another lecture, he decides to become more active, including planning a prison break, as shown in the scene, with Charlotte and Scarlett Johansson to leave the isolation of the hotel.
Charlotte, uncertain and naive. Notice that she is given no last name in the movie, unlike Bob Harris. Her lack of a last name shows that she hasn't developed her own professional and grown-up idea of herself. She is at a completely different stage of her life than Bob. Charlotte is young, recently graduated from college, and in a new and uncertain marriage. Yet, like Bob, she is struggling with similar feelings of isolation, depression, and uncertainty. Coppola has discussed how the character reflected her experiences as a young woman growing up, including her insecurity and confusion. The famous butt shot that opens the film is an odd and debated choice. There is a lot you can read into the shot, and many people have written about it. In our analysis, it's important to see that we are viewing her detached and isolated. Literally, we don't see her head or even know who it is until later in the film. Her lack of clothing displays her vulnerability to the lens of the camera and to the audience. The detached, isolated, and vulnerable parts of her character continues with our next introduction to her character. Framed by the window, coming into focus like her attempts to bring her life into focus, she joins her husband in the bed. Yet, we see him asleep and not waiting to really talk to her, leaving her distance from him. Charlotte, unlike Bob, does venture from the hotel, but still feels isolated. During the scene at the shrine, she stays an isolated viewer and then tells Lauren that she didn't feel anything. Her personal life reflects this distance from people too, as she has no particularly close scenes with her husband or her husband's friends. Also, examine the clutter aspect of her room and how that reflects her cluttered mental state. She is isolated and uncertain like Bob, but in different ways due to her different life and age.
As you finish watching the film, look at how the failed or aborted romance between the two characters helps them learn about themselves. Ask yourselves if the fact that they don't engage in a romantic relationship makes the moments and experiences they have together any less important for their characters' lives and mental states. Watch how their experiences together are acted. So pay attention to the gestures and features of Murray and Johansson. Are these realistic people? Are they acting naturally? How can you describe their performances? And finally, watch how the nature of Tokyo helps them learn about each other. Thank you, and we'll see you for our next video lecture.